Drums for the marching men with victory medals on their chests. Drums for the dead left behind. Drums for the future they had fought for. Drums when the black 369th Infantry returned from the front in the year 1990. Proudly they moved through the streets towards Harlem. Because they had fought gallantly to make the world safe for democracy, to black people everywhere, particularly the young, the future looked very bright. Harlem, 1920. A little more than 600 acres of land. Hundreds, thousands of black people were coming here, particularly from the rural areas of America. A few brought memories from Africa. The Indians were here first, then the Dutch took over. Then came the English, Irish, then the Jews. But then the blacks started moving in from other parts of New York City, and the whites began moving out. By the early 1920s, Harlem was mostly black. The remaining white residents, feeling threatened, began moving to other parts of the city. People began calling Harlem the capital of black America. During the 20s, there were roughly 200,000 black people living in Harlem. A few lived in stylish splendor on 138th Street in houses designed by Stanford White. Unable to break down the walls of discrimination that separated them from the white middle class, they formed their own exclusive clubs. Some were pace-setters of elegance and fashion in the community. We actually had a millionairess in our midst. Her name was Alelia Walker. Alelia's elegance and high fashion were the talk of the entire city. She entertained royalty, high society, and the leading figures in the black community at her Harlem townhouse, and also at her palatial mansion at Irvington-on-the-Hudson. But Alelia Walker was one in 10 million. Virtually all of Harlem's population was born and raised in desperate poverty, surrounded with hate and hostile rural environments. Looking for opportunity, those who were able left these areas and migrated to a place that was on the lips of black people everywhere. Harlem, New York, the capital of black America. In New York, we found greater freedom than we had ever known. Even though there were places blacks could not go to eat or live, even though it was a little more crowded than back home, black men and women could walk the streets here unmolested. During those days, we strolled a little more than most people. Any time of day or night, you could see young and old strolling up and down Lenox and 7th Avenues. In those days, Harlem was one of the nicest parts of New York City. The migration here was aggressively encouraged by Philip A. Payton, a black real estate man. We owned most of the homes in Harlem. Even some of the businesses were black-owned. But like today, most Harlemites worked in menial jobs for white people downtown. We cleaned stores and other businesses, were porters, bootblacks. We ran errands, we waited on tables. We dug up streets and filled them up again. It was all most of us could do to make ends meet with the prices rising all the time. A lot of talented people were coming to Harlem in those days. This photographic studio on 135th Street was owned by a young photographer who took pictures for all occasions. He was a man of many talents, a Renaissance man. His name, James Vanderzee, a prime contributor to what has been called the Harlem Renaissance. His legacy, thousands and thousands of pictures. Pictures of little boys. And pictures of little girls. Pictures of the Sunday school of the Abyssinian Baptist Church with its minister, the Reverend Adam Clayton Powell, Sr., one of the dynamic leaders of this growing community. There sure was a lot of energy here in Harlem. Plenty of hope and plenty of pride. Take Jack Johnson, for example. Just a few years earlier, he showed everybody that given a chance, a black man could rise to the top. He was quite a man and a dandy, too. In those days, there were quite a few dandies in Harlem. Some lived way beyond their means trying to keep pace with the roaring 20s. At night, the white dandies came up from downtown to enjoy the sights and nightlife and dance all night at places like Connie's Inn and the world-famous Cotton Club. The orchestra at the Cotton Club was headed by another talented young fellow, Edward Kennedy Ellington, or the Duke. He was the jazz man of the Harlem Renaissance. Yes, there were a lot of talented black people coming to Harlem in those days. Cab Calloway, quite a performer. And those beauties in the chorus line like Josephine Baker and Ethel Waters, they really had the town talking. Places like the Cotton Club catered exclusively to white patrons. They paid a good deal of money to extract our humor from us. Because my mouth is wide with laughter and my throat is deep with song, you do not think I suffer after I have held my pain so long. Because my mouth is wide with laughter, you do not hear my inner cry. Because my feet are gay with dancing, you do not know I die. A poem by Langston Hughes, a talented young Harlemite. But white America wasn't listening. They had come to Harlem to be free, to let their hair down, to frequent a world quite different from their own. They liked one of our dances in particular. We called it the Charleston. They took it downtown, and soon it was all over the country. In those days, there was a young dancer who could make up steps faster than you can say Bojangles. His name, Bill Robinson. Bert Williams saw him dancing out in Chicago and brought him here to New York. Even though Bert Williams' famous partner, George Walker, died a few years before, in 1920, Williams was still one of the greatest comedians in show business. Williams always wanted to be a serious actor on the American stage, but white Americans wanted him to keep them laughing. Bessie Smith came to Harlem. She had blues to sing. There were other songs, too. Songs written by Fats Waller and Andy Ratzak. A renaissance was in the air in Harlem. In these 2 square miles of land, there were countless community groups, symphony and popular orchestras like those of the Clef Club, cultural societies, black motion picture companies, and theater groups like the Lafayette Players. In 1921, the most exciting legitimate show to open on Broadway was the all-black musical Shuffle Along, the hit of the season, written by Flournoy Miller and Aubrey Lyles. The show had a carload of hit songs by the prolific songwriting team of Noble Sissle and Eubie Blake.
And just like honey from the bee, and those quaint.
The first musical comedy to use a dramatic storyline, Shuffle Along revolutionized the musical on Broadway. Even most musicals today are based on its pioneering format and style. It opened up opportunities for lots of newcomers. People like that young football star, Paul Robeson, who later became a world-renowned actor and singer on the American stage.
And then what did she say?
What'd she say, baby?
Shuffle Along had a number of stars, but the most dazzling of them all was Florence Mills.
Now I've got the gypsy blues, and I'm sorry that I did refuse.
But there was another side to Florence Mills. Another side to the cast of Shuffle Along, the band of Duke Ellington, to all the talented black artists of the 20s. Another side to the happy people of Harlem. The side that looked at death, violent death, and mourned. Day dawned, and soon the mixed crowds came in view. The ghastly bodies swaying in the sun. The women thronged to look, but never a one showed sorrow in her eyes of steely blue. And little lads, lynchers that were to be, danced round the dreadful thing in fiendish glee. There was a lot of talk about the young poets who had come to Harlem and who were expressing what people were feeling about the lynchings in America. Young poets like Claude McKay gave white America a glimpse of what is at the back of the black man's mind. If we must die, let it not be like hogs, hunted and penned in an inglorious spot, while round us bark the mad and hungry dogs, making their mock at our cursed lot. If we must die, oh, let us nobly die, so that our precious blood may not be shed in vain. Then even the monsters we defy shall be constrained to honor us though dead. O kinsmen, we must meet the common foe. Though far outnumbered, let us show us brave, and for their 1,000 blows deal one death blow. What though before us lies the open grave? Like men, we'll face the murderous, cowardly pack, pressed to the wall, dying, but fighting back. McKay wrote both of those poems. There was something different about these young poets. They didn't seem to see life the same way as the older people. Though their form and style was traditional English verse, the content and feeling of their writings was distinctly black. The young poet Langston Hughes had come to Harlem from out west. He writes about these young people, about their thoughts and their feelings. We younger Negro artists who create now intend to express our individual dark-skinned selves without fear or shame. If white people are pleased, we are glad. If they are not, it doesn't matter. We know we are beautiful, and ugly too. The tom-tom cries, and the tom-tom laughs. These were the new Negroes. Professor Alan Locke of Howard University wrote a book about them called The New Negro. In it, Dr. Locke leaves us a rich legacy of our history, our music, our art, and literature. In The New Negro, Dr. Locke speaks of a renaissance in Harlem. Many outstanding people are represented in its pages. People like Hall Johnson, musical conductor. Arna Bontemps, poet. Aaron Douglas, painter. Walter White, writer and undercover operative for the NAACP. Richmond Bartet, sculptor. Augusta Savage, sculptress. W.E.B. Du Bois, philosopher and activist. Arthur Schomburg, historian. Jessie Fawcett, novelist. James Weldon Johnson, poet, author, and head of the NAACP. And Rose McClendon, a leading actress of the Lafayette Players. One of the most distinguished poems recorded in the book, The New Negro, is written by young Langston Hughes. After roaming the black communities of America and the rest of the world, working on freighters, waiting on tables, he captures the essence of the black experience. I've known rivers. I've known rivers ancient as the world and older than the flow of human blood in human veins. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. I bathed in the Euphrates when dawns were young. I built my hut near the Congo, and it lulled me to sleep. I looked upon the Nile and raised the pyramids above it. I heard the singing of the Mississippi when Abe Lincoln went down to New Orleans, and I've seen its muddy bosom turn all golden in the sunset. I've known rivers, ancient, dusky rivers. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. The depth, the vision, the genius of these young writers began to appear regularly in Opportunity magazine, official journal of the Urban League, edited by the sociologist Charles S. Johnson, and in the Crisis magazine, the official journal of the NAACP, edited by W.E.B. Du Bois, and other publications like The Messenger. The writings of the Renaissance writers also began to appear in the white publications downtown, largely through the efforts of Carl Van Vechten, a well-known white writer who took a keen interest in the creative people of Harlem. They had other benefactors too, like Casper Holstein, who established awards and scholarships for them. But perhaps the man whose activities most benefited these creative people was Arthur A. Schomburg, a black Puerto Rican, whose library collection of books and manuscripts on Afro-American and African history is the most extensive in the United States. From their study there, our Renaissance writers began to ask new questions, like those posed by the brilliant young poet Countee Cullen. What is Africa to me? Copper sun, or Scarlet Sea, Jungle Star or Jungle Track, strong bronzed men or regal black, women from whose loins I sprang when the birds of Eden sang. One 3 centuries removed from the seeds his fathers loved, spicy grove, cinnamon tree. What is Africa to me? What were the forces behind this surge of creative activity? These writers' works covered many themes. Understandably, the major recurring theme is race. Their preoccupation with race did not develop overnight. The burnings, the massacres, like this one in East St. Louis, these scenes were branded on their minds forever. The East St. Louis riots occurred in 1917 while the brothers of some of the Renaissance artists were overseas, fighting a war to make the world safe for democracy. Some of the writers marched in the famous silent protest parade that took place along Fifth Avenue. The marchers, 15,000 black people. This parade was our protest against these massacres. Because of the hostile racial climate of America, the silent parade was indeed a courageous act. At the vanguard of the parade were the 2 most revered and distinguished leaders in Afro-American life, James Weldon Johnson and W.E.B. Du Bois. These 2 men were a continuing source of inspiration for the young Renaissance writers. They provided them with leadership and examples of scholarship. Their writings nourished the minds of these young artists. Working out of his office at the Crisis magazine, Dr. Du Bois created an unending flow of information on the black experience. His book, Souls of Black Folk, was required reading for the creative talents of the Renaissance. The distinguished poet, writer, and head of the NAACP, James Weldon Johnson, was the idol and mentor of many writers, artists, and young musical talents like the tenor Roland Hayes, who looked to him for encouragement. One of his most outstanding books was Black Manhattan. It was felt by Johnson and Du Bois that the art, poetry, and writing of distinguished black people would play a large role in developing black pride and in breaking down the walls of racial discrimination so prevalent in America. That the best way to combat racial violence, prejudice, and discrimination was to reveal to the white community of America that black citizens were orderly, neat, and well-behaved. And so, in the silent parade, everyone put on their Sunday best, shined their shoes, wore their best hats, in the hope that America would alter its thinking. But there were other parades. A movement that started here in Harlem spread throughout the black communities of the United States. At its peak, it had a following of 6 million black people. At the head of this movement was the dynamic public speaker Marcus Garvey. He posed another solution to the problem of race in America. He had a tremendous impact on the young people of the 20s, particularly the creative ones. His words, "Let us go home to Africa. Let us go back and leave this cancerous land. No political surgeons can cut out this disease. 6 million black people have spoken." His ideas caused considerable controversy. For the first time in the 20th century, the concepts of black pride, black nationalism, black power were organized into a political movement, the United Negro Improvement Association, with headquarters in Harlem. Under the influence of Marcus Garvey, the idea of Africa took firm root in the minds of the talented new Negroes of Harlem, in the minds of people like Aaron Douglas, perhaps the most outstanding artist of the period. Douglas studied in both America and Europe, but in these paintings found his greatest inspiration in the art of Africa. More than any other artist of the period, his work symbolized the growing significance of Africa to black people. Equally important, his work reflected the spirit of the Renaissance. It is often said that we black people cannot speak of a Renaissance because prior to our subjugation into slavery and feudalism, we were savages fighting for survival in the jungles of Africa. But the ancient Greeks and Romans, as well as the sages of the European Renaissance, had quite a different view of black people. Even as late as 200 years ago, Count Volney, a high official in Napoleon's government, in describing the African people, said in his noted book, The Ruins of Empires, "There a people now forgotten, discovered while others were yet barbarians, the elements of the arts and sciences, a race of men now rejected from society for their sable skin and frizzled hair, founded on the study of the laws of nature, those civil and religious systems which still govern the universe." What were the root causes of the Renaissance? Was it the war? Was it racism, radicalism, or liberalism? Was it the Roaring Twenties? Was it the dynamic presence of individuals like W.E.B. Du Bois, James Weldon Johnson, Arthur Schomburg, Alan Locke, Carl Van Vechten? Was it Marcus Garvey? Who knows? Or does it really matter what caused the Renaissance? Much more important is the fact that it was a turning point in Afro-American thought and creativity. Its impact is still being felt today. Perhaps it is because the Renaissance stems from something deeper, something very ancient, something that comes from the souls of black folks, the spirit of survival and liberation, indeed a perennial spirit in the history of all mankind, a spirit that now flowers in the works of black artists, writers, social and political thinkers, in the works of all who create in the many Harlems of America today.